Hello, this is Tony Blazer back with another video here for the Motocross Vault on YouTube. And for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one of my classic brochures and go over that. This one should be a little bit shorter than the other one I did on the magazine. Obviously, instead of 100 pages, it's only like 9 or 10. Brochures are one of my favorite things that I have in my collection here. As you can see, I probably 2,000 magazines of when I last kind of added them up. Pretty extensive collection of classic motocross magazines, but I also have a lot of classic motocross brochures. I use them in my research for the classic steel articles I do on Pulp MX, and they're full of great information. They have great technical photos and a lot of the technical information that I need in order to write those articles. If you want to know how big the engine was a certain year or what the born stroke was. All that information a lot of times is in the brochure. It's real handy when you're going to write a article, 30 years after a bike was built. I love going back and looking at them, and I thought it might be fun to go over some of them. Like I said, I have pretty much every one going back to the early 70s. For Honda, Kawasaki, slowly getting the KTM ones. Now, a lot of these I actually collected at the time. The one I'm going to go over today is for the 1988 Yamaha lineup, and that is a brochure I got myself from Fredericktown Yamaha in Frederick, Maryland, way back in the late 80s. I actually had a couple of Yamahas in 88. Well, I had them a few years later, but I had two 88 Yamahas. I had an 88 125 and a 250. Good bikes. I think the 250 is probably a better overall bike than the 125 was that year. I enjoyed them both, but both had their good and bad points. Yamaha was kind of coming off a pretty rough period in the early 80s, and the 84, 83, 82 bikes weren't the best. 88 was kind of a turnaround year. They came out with an all-new 250 that year that was totally redesigned. Really cool bike, kind of looked like their Works YZM bike over in Europe. And that bike was a big improvement for sure. The 125 is kind of a rehashed version of the 86 bike. Wasn't a big difference, but the 250 was a big deal. This will be, like I said, a little shorter. So if you like it, let me know, and I'll do some more. Like I said, I have tons and tons of brochures back there to go over. And if you like them, like I said, I'll take a few minutes to go over each one with you. So make sure you subscribe and ding that little bell to get updated when we do a new video. And here we go. Hope you like it. Alright, here we have the cover for the 1988 Yamaha brochure for their YZ80, 125, 250, and the mighty 490. Like I said earlier, 88 was a pretty important year for Yamaha. They had, as I said, come off a couple of kind of tough years. Their bikes were definitely a step behind the best, which were pretty much Honda at the time. In 86 and 87, they were okay bikes. The main problem was the suspension was pretty terrible. Honda had gone to cartridge forks in 1986, and Yamaha stayed with the damper rod style fork in 86 and 87. They had what they called a TCV, a travel control valve gimmick in the forks, but it worked awful. I rode a buddy of mine had an 87 YZ250, and the suspension, it was just atrocious. It was so harsh. Another buddy of mine had a 492, and it was just really brutal suspension. Pretty much unlike anything you'd ride today. I mean, if you haven't ridden a bike from the 80s with bad suspension, it's kind of hard to fathom just how bad it was back then. No bike today has anything that's even remotely terrible by those standards, but we had some truly bad bikes in the 80s. But in 88, Yamaha added cartridge forks for the first time, which were at the time like a breakthrough in technology. Damper rod forks basically had a really narrow range of operation. If you set them up to work well, like off big jumps and stuff, then they didn't work well off small stuff, and they just had you had to kind of compromise with how they functioned. And then stuff on the Yamahas there in the mid 80s was just terrible. They had Simmons made a kit that could improve the performance, but they weren't great. And in 88 they added the cartridge stuff, and that made a big difference in terms of the performance. On the 125 here, this bike was all new in 1986. Not a huge difference in 88. The main things they added for 88 was a rear disc brake, which you can see here on the lower left, and the cartridge forks, which gave it a much wider range of damping. They're much more sophisticated design in terms of the damping. It allowed the bike to be handle small stuff and large stuff much more comprehensively. Definitely, I mean, it was like a night and day suspension improvement. You can also see this if you see the chain guide here at the bottom left. That's one thing about the Yamahas back then. They had the hardest chain guides known to man. These things were just clatter traps. If you couldn't hear anything else but the bike, you'd hear that. It would just be, clack, 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 clack. They were hard as a rock. They wouldn't wear out. It wasn't like, if you go and restore an older Honda or something, you end up having to buy one of the new chain guides because that soft rubber one would chew through. But this thing was like made of concrete. It just would not, it would not chew up. That disc brake, I remember, I had 87 CR125 as well, and the Yamaha version of the disc was much grabbier. I remember it had a real kind of a light switch feel. At the time, of course, a lot of people were still coming off drum brakes, but I remember these early discs were they were it wasn't so much that they were powerful as they had a real touchy feel. Like it was you barely touched them and locked the rear wheel real easy. It was kind of hard to get used to at first. Definitely more power, but the feel was a little weird until you got used to it. If you look at the caliper too, it's much real kind of a ungangly, oversized design. The bodywork here, the rest of the bike was new in '86. This case reed motor Yamaha had was a big improvement over the earlier YZs in the early '80s. In '84 and '85, the YZ125 was an absolute dog. It was just a turd. I remember that a buddy of mine had one of those too, and I rode it. It was just god awful. They weren't really easy to get fixed either. You could spend tons and tons of money on them, and they didn't get any better. So in '86, this new case reed engine was a big improvement. It didn't have the long broad pull of the Honda, but it had a really really punchy power band. I remember, like I said, I had this '88 just like this, and it was really really powerful down low for a 125. It was snappy, a lot of torque, a really strong mid-range punch, but absolutely no top end whatsoever. If you try to rev it out, which you think you'd want to do on a 125, it actually went slower. It just kind of hit a wall. So it was one of these things where you kind of, got it up into the power band, and as soon as you got past the mid-range, you snapped off a shift. The shifting also was not very good. These things had incredibly notchy transmissions, which is not great on a 125 with a narrow power band. I actually went through a couple of shift shafts on this thing. I would stomp on the shifter so hard, trying to get it to catch the next gear, that I actually bent the shaft as it came out of the cases. I had to replace it twice. That's it's kind of hard to fathom, but yeah, you could literally jump on the shifter and it would not shift gears. You had to roll off the throttle, feed into the clutch, and then you could get the next gear. It was just a really notchy transmission. So overall, this was a good bike, a better bike than some of the ones that it replaced, obviously, but far from perfect. The main thing was it was punchy, fun to ride, great mid-range burst motor, but if you, not really as good as some of the other machines. Basically, the best bike to buy this year was probably the Honda. It had a much smoother transmission and a wider power band. This YZ was fun, but there were better bikes to be had that year. While the 125 was definitely improved for '88, by far the biggest improvement in the YZ line was on the 250. This YZ was brand new from stem to stern. It wasn't a mildly refreshed version like the 125. It was a completely new machine. Now this '88 YZ, the styling, as you can see, is very different. It was all new as well. It was based on the YZM500 bike being raced in the Grand Prix in Europe, which was a full works Yamaha with an aluminum tank and alloy frame. Really, really cool bike. I understand it wasn't maybe the best motorcycle actually, but sure did look cool. We all thought it was badass at the time. So this '88 YZ was kind of loosely, styling-wise at least, based on that machine. It used a kind of a radical-looking bodywork, like I said, with the asymmetrical design. The shroud you can see here on the right is much smaller than the one on the left. The left is like, I don't know, double or triple the size. Kind of similar to the old '85 Works RC500 Hondas over in Europe. Definitely a cool machine. Like I said, I had this bike. The suspension was a little soft stock, but the cartridge forks were like so much better than the '87 damper rod forks. It just wasn't funny. It was night and day better. I wasn't super fast. The most I ever got was intermediate class, but even I thought the suspension was a little soft in the front. This shock was kind of an Olin's knockoff, also way better than 87. Probably not the best suspension in the class this year. That probably went to the Suzuki, but it was a huge improvement. The 250's got the same rattle trap chain guard. That was really, like I said, annoying. You could hear when you're riding with your helmet on. You could still hear that damn chain clattering. It was really crazy. Um, I know this is a popular restoration bike because it's kind of a important bike for Yamaha. Definitely one of the coolest bikes in the mid '80s. I'm glad to say I had one. Next up, we have the dinosaur of the 500 class in 1988, the Yamaha YZ490. It's pretty amazing to think that only a couple years before this, Brock Glover had taken basically the same machine to the 500 national motocross title against Works Hondas. But he did. Probably more of a testament to Brock's ability than that of the 490. At the time, this was the only 500 still using air cooling in the class. That made it, of course, simpler to work on, but also meant you're going to deal with a little more vibration. You're also going to have that rattling fin noise and a loss of power as the thing got hot. The bike was very simple, though. Uh, Improvements this year were limited to some minor stuff. As you can see, it did not get the uh, disc brake of the smaller bikes. The 125 and the 250 got the rear disc. Unfortunately, the 490, arguably the bike that probably needed it the most, was stuck with still a drum. It did get a larger front disc though. They upped the size of the front discs on all the 88 YZs by 10 millimeters, so it went from a 220 millimeter to a 230 front disc. I suppose, like I said, on a 500, any bit of stopping power is welcome. The shock itself got some new valving, but it wasn't great. It did okay over big jumps and stuff, but it was very busy over braking bumps and chatter like that. The motor was a little weird on these too. Like I said, a buddy of mine had an 87, which is basically the exact same bike as this, minus the cartridge forks, and the power was weird for a 500. I've had several 500s over the years, and none of them really run like a 490. 490 is kind of soft down low, and through the middle even. Most of its power is pretty high in the power band, which is, like I said, very strange for a 500. Most of the time, you're not looking to rev the crap out of your 500 because it tries to swat you like a fly when that happens. It was even worse on these because the 490s vibrated really bad too. They were paint shakers out there, so your hands were liable to go numb about the time you're wanting to slow down. So the YZ490 was a bit of a handful. It did make a pretty good off-road bike for like out in the desert and stuff. There's no radiators to worry about smashing. The bike it's very stable at speed. It doesn't have the kind of head shake you'd get on a Honda CR. It was not really great in the turns, but more stable than the Hondas. Like I said, the cartridge forks were probably the main advantage that this one has over earlier ones. They all pinged. They rattled like crazy, and the motor was never. And if you didn't get the head modded, it never ran really perfectly. But with some careful setup and some fine tuning, these could be really great motorcycles. Even today, they're kind of fun bikes to have and ride. You just have to be aware of their peccadillos. The 490 would live on a couple more years, and the 88 was probably really the last significant update the bike ever got. It went on till I think 1990 was the last year for it. And if you don't count the WR500, which is basically this machine with some updated chassis from the 250, this bike basically stayed the same until it was retired a couple years later. All right, last up for 1988 is Damon Bradshaw's Mini of choice, the YZ80. In 1988, the YZ80 was, I think, 2 years old at this point. The bike was all new in 1986, very much like the 125. But this bike was already pretty outdated, even by mini class standards, where things move at a pretty snail's pace. Although I guess you could consider that Yamaha may have been going for a different market. This bike was clearly aimed at the smaller, less experienced mini pilot. It offered a power band that was much mellower than the other machines, and the ergonomics were smaller too. The bike was definitely way more cramped if you were a very large rider. The bike offered pretty mediocre at best suspension. Like I said, it was really kind of behind the other bikes. A Honda CR80 at this time was way faster machine, and better in most ways as well. The Suzuki offered better suspension. The bike was good for small pilots and inexperienced pilots, but if you were really a fast kid, you're going to need to get some mods done pretty quickly. The bike was going to kind of reach its limits pretty fast. The suspension, well, like I said, wasn't great. It did have a front disc, no rear disc. I think in '88, maybe the Kawasaki had a rear disc. It might have been the only one that had that. I was already I never had a mini bike. My parents wouldn't let me have a mini bike when I was little, so I kind of read about them, but I never owned one myself. Never ever actually ridden a YZ80. But a couple of buddies might have had Hondas, but I never got to ride these. But from reading shootouts and doing some tests on them, I do know a little bit about them. One other thing to comment on is this gear in the lower right. Holy crap, that's an ugly helmet. I think it looks like a laser. There was some ugly stuff back then. Definitely feel sorry for you if you're stuck on the YZ80 and with that helmet. I will say this though, this bike does have the distinction of the dirt bike kid had one, so it wasn't a complete disaster. So anyway, this is the last one we're going to cover in this, and like I said, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and we'll do some more. Maybe do Honda or somebody else next time. Try to make it a little shorter maybe. In any case, let me know, and I hope you enjoyed it, and have a excellent rest of your day.